My guest today is Frau Grois. She was the governor's school German teacher from 1991 to 2019. How's it going today, Frau Grois?
It's been tough with the COVID and also with retirement. I I didn't want to retire, but I felt like it's time. I was the last of that whole group of teachers who started in 1991. Mr. Tharp was the next to the last one, and I decided finally I gotta go. It's time for me to leave. But anyway, I mean, retirement has been different. I knew get bored, so I became a substitute teacher for Henrico and Chesterfield, and I was doing that until March 12th. So I miss being in a classroom. I miss being with students, but it's time to do other things.
hmm Would you consider
That's
doing online education, being a teacher online?
Yeah, but you know what? It's kind of nice having to be able to set your own schedule. I've only subbed for there are very few German programs in Chesterfield and Henrico, and actually that is an advantage. Not having to be tied down to one program.
hmm
And I feel really bad with my former colleagues having to go through this and learn how to do this Zoom and how to connect to the students, because even though I see you, it's not the same as being in the classroom. So I know they're having a hard time, but it is a different way of teaching. And I'm sure some will get really good at it and want to do it only online like this. My son, Paul, I don't know if you knew about it, but I have two sons. And Paul had an accident in 2003. He fell off of a cliff. And I almost stopped teaching at that point, but he has a traumatic brain injury. But my husband was at home working from home, and we decided let's just like try to keep some sort of normal life, normal routine. But Paul, he has gotten better. He's not the same as he was before, but
Yeah.
he was able to go back to school, and I helped him 12 years of getting his associate's degree from John Tyler Community College. But to get to the point of online classes, he had to take a few online classes, and those were more difficult because they didn't have Zoom, or at least the professors never used Zoom, and the communication was hard, and it was hard. I thought it was harder just in general instead of being in a room in a building, but that's the future of teaching. When I think a lot of teachers, after they get used to this, that they're going to say, hey, do we need to be in a building? Really?
I was wondering if you could tell me, to switch gears quite a bit, about how you found the governor's school or how the governor's school found you.
I came back to the States in 1981,
hmm
and I taught at Richmond City for a year. And then I had my son, Paul. And then 2 years later, I had my other son, Eric. And I stayed at home for 7 years. And it was getting like, let's just say, I wasn't appreciated as a mother and a housewife. Then I thought, let me go back and see if I can find a job, which I did for Richmond City. And I was part-time at two schools. The second year, 1991, they asked me, hey, would you like to do two classes at this new governor's school? And I thought, wow, yes, of course. I thought this is a different type of school. I would love to be part of it. And so I taught at a Richmond school in the morning, and then in the afternoon I had two classes. We were still part-time. All the language teachers were part-time. And then the third year I became full-time. But I knew I wanted to be part of this school because of the curriculum. I knew it would be more challenging. But the one thing that I think most teachers, when they come to the governor's school at whatever point in time they come, you kind of think that, these kids, they say they're all gifted, right? Well, they never tell you they might really be gifted in math, but maybe not so much in learning languages. So that balancing act until you get to know the students is kind of hard. 28 years at the governor's school. And in the end, I really appreciated the opportunity to be kind of like my own boss.
hmm
I had bosses, but in the classroom, I was the boss. But the thing is, I have to say, as far as, going back to the beginning, it was chaotic. It was, I mean, to be asked to do things that I never had even imagined to do. And we wrote the mission statement, we wrote the vision statement, everything. It was just very difficult. But in the end, the one thing I learned is, and I always try to say this to my students and anybody listening, is working on a team and everybody pulling his or her own weight is much easier than just doing it by yourself, right? And also to be kind of, like humble. That's one of the things I kind of didn't like at the beginning, because a lot of the kids, the first group that came in, when did you graduate?
97. I was the third class through.
Third class. Well, your class were still, it was like, oh, you're elite. You're better than, remember, other kids at TJ, you're better than this. And the other kids at TJ, they resented that, that they thought that they were going to be part of this governor's school. And I had to sometimes say, hey, guys, you shouldn't think you're better than the other kids. You aren't. I mean, it's just that you have this opportunity, and that's the key. It still is the key. It's the opportunity to kind of stretch yourself, to challenge yourself. That's the one thing that the kids really liked. And I remember I had a son too, Eric, the second one, who went to the governor's school too. And I was so happy that he was able to go there, because I knew he needed a place where he could feel like it's okay to be smart. So I think that atmosphere, that environment of learning, and for me, also for teaching, that type of student, who really wants to learn. The challenging ones had other issues going on in their lives. It wasn't, I don't think, me that they had that problem with, but that's the other part that really made me want to stay, is that I saw it wasn't just about the academic side of you all, it's about the emotional, the feeling, accepting yourself, as being okay, you're smart. And it's okay to be not as smart as your neighbor, right? Or your one of your classmates. And I would always try to reach out to those kids that were a little bit kind of down on themselves, like they were not so smart, and say, hey, wait a minute. When you get out of here, you're going to really show the world that you can do something really special, because you do.
You've seen a lot more than the average governor's school alum has seen with as many years as you've been there, the 10 administration changes, as you mentioned. You don't have to give me highlights from all 10, but what were kind of the most memorable stylistic changes that the administration's made from start to finish?
Ooh, do you really want to hear that?
Yeah.
I'll just say this. Being the director of the governor's school, whether it was at TJ or at Maggie Walker, is, I think, a very difficult job. I would never have wanted to have it. But that's because you're like a superintendent, principal, and you're being pulled from all sides, right? So let's start with Dr. Ballou. I'll just give him credit for having some sort of vision, because he realized that gifted students need smaller classes. You can't have 30 in a classroom and still think that you're going to be teaching them the best that you could. So his philosophy was that when it reached 20, he would split it in half. So I had plenty of classes because that was his philosophy, and it was good. It was good to have the smaller classes because everybody got to know each other, and everybody had, more interaction. The one thing that was kind of bad is that he allowed the students too much power. And I'm sorry to say this, but unless you're, if you have children and, you give them too much power, they're going to take advantage of that. And then, of course, with his leaving, that kind of left everything chaotic. We had Miss Shudell as an interim, and then we had Dr. Shannon. And I think she straightened things out with the budget. And she was finally starting to maybe realize who the teachers were. She always confused me with the Spanish teacher, Miss Jones. Even though Mrs. Jones was a head smaller than I was, and we would laugh at that. She never got our names straight, just like I never got you and Jerry Stone, right? I would always, Miss Jones and I, we said, hey, maybe we should have a T-shirt and says, this is Dawn and that's Helen, right? She could never remember that. So, I mean, something to laugh about, but I mean, she did have a hard time with the students. I know that. Students didn't like her because complete opposite of Dr. Blues was the open door, right? And sit in my desk kind of thing, at my desk and in my chair. And she had the door closed and students just didn't like it. And then we had Mr. Chiscornia. He got us into the building at Maggie Walker because remember, we were getting pretty crowded there with the TJ kids. And I would always tell my students at Maggie Walker, now you take care of this computer, you take care of this table, you do not write on it. Because the roaches, we had roaches in our, I said, and I would tell them the stories about the air conditioning and that no computer, I mean, think about our computer situation. I mean, we got a language lab. We got a language lab at Maggie Walker. You know, that was a great accomplishment for Mr. Chiscornia. Mm-hmm. And then I was on the council. We decided to get somebody that was going to bring us back to some sort of normalcy, and that was Mr. Hunt. So Mr. Hunt was there for a long, long time. It was status quo for 7 years. And then he retired. Then we got Mr. Morton. And I thought when we had the announcement, oh, Mr. Morton, he was older than I was. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. No. He's not supposed to be older than I am. No. But he was. Was it Dr. McGee? I think it was Dr. McGee after Mr. Morton. And he was there for almost 3.5 years. And again, you know, at that time, I became the department chair. And of course, I saw a different side of him than just being a regular classroom teacher. And again, that's what I see. People in this position, it's difficult. And especially if you have teachers who don't like you or students who don't like you and they make, you know, and then parents don't like you and you're being bombarded now with emails and, you know, you're not doing it right. And, you know, quite honestly, that's what I'm saying. I don't think I could take too much criticism. Yeah. And then now we have Dr. Lowry, who is younger. And he's been there now, I guess, 4 years. He came from Henrico. You know, they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses, just like any person has their strengths and their weaknesses. But it has to be somebody who really believes in the giftedness of children, and all teachers as well as administrators have to get a gifted endorsements. To understand a little bit about a gifted student, you should have some information, but it goes beyond that. A class, you don't become a teacher because you take teaching courses. It's from experience, and having had a son, Eric, who is gifted, I understood that he needed some sort of special kind of teaching to allow him to be creative, especially in the subject areas that he really loved. I've always tried to make sure that my students don't leave with that feeling of being not, as one student told me, I don't feel worthy of being here. And I said, what are you talking about? You are worthy. You're so smart. You don't know it. And I said, you'll know it when you get out of here. I'm going to say this. It's taken the stress of that place. And I, beginning with that first class, I was just thinking about it. You know, I found a letter when I was going through all my things, and I had lots of stuff in my closets, and I was giving it away, and I was telling a story with a lot of this. And I had this Cabbage Patch class, and I called her Monica, and I would use her for learning body parts and everything, or clothing. And I remember, I won't say the name of that student, but It was a class of 1995. He came in, it was junior year, they were like breaking down. And he came into my classroom and he lay down on the floor, took Monica, the doll, and curled up and fell asleep. And, in most cases, you don't let your kids sleep. But I knew something was wrong there. And I let him sleep. And the junior class, a team, they wrote a letter to Dr. Ballou and said, this, we got to kind of like ratchet the homework back. We got to do something for these kids. Well, that only lasted not very long. I waited 25 years until we finally got a school psychologist, as well as a policy on homework. And now they have a policy where if you have classes Mondays, Wednesdays, I can only give 30 minutes of homework for a regular class, an honors class, or an hour for an AP. The kids can say, hey, look, this one teacher just gives us way too much homework, right? It was kind of like, well, we got to be rigorous. That was always the word, rigorous. And I define rigor differently than just a lot of homework. I hope in the future that will continue, that because you don't stress your students out, you don't make them feel stupid, you don't make them feel like they're not worthy. I always said, you guys are going to be the leaders of the world, right? You are going to be doing things that I could never do, but you can. And that's what made me feel really good about being there, is that I was part of your lives. And I hope, even though sometimes I got on the preachy side, but it's because I saw sometimes students not addressing the issues. There was one class, I was really upset that they were ugly to each other, really ugly. I spoke out when I found out about it, because I thought, you know what, I hope your parents are saying this to you, but here's your teacher saying it to you too, because what you're doing is not right. And sometimes, that's not teaching German, but it's teaching you to become a better person.
Thank you for giving me all those stories. I appreciate you being so open. I wanted to end on kind of what I hope is a little bit of a light note. I wanted you to see if you can think of the most memorable Strand project or senior seminar equivalent.
The most memorable? Come on. It's when Mr. Bagat took off with all their Strand projects. That was in the class of 1990. He disappeared. And he took all of their Strand papers with him. And there was this big, what are we going to do? Because they're supposed to get was it a VCU credit for this? And there were no papers. It was like a catastrophe.
I don't know this story.
You didn't know that story?
Which class was this?
I think it was the 1995.
Wow, the originals.
The originals, that was. Or 1996, either one of them. But it was like, he just disappeared. No one could find him. And he had remember, we didn't have everything saved on a computer. They had already typed it out and he took them. And then what are we going to do? So I think Dr. Ballou said, just write something quickly and then we'll hand it in and grade it. I mean, it was just, it was not funny at the time, for sure. But it's just one of those kind of things that when you look back at, like, what do we do now, right? A lot of those kind of stories are like, how do we solve that problem, And thank God I was not an administrator, but something had to be done. Yeah, it's interesting when we sit down. Miss Pollard, she's been there and Miss Lozen, she's been there forever too. We try to match up stories, and then in the end, they have a different story that I couldn't remember. There was a lot of laughter too. As I said, I left on my terms, and I was happy to leave. And I figured my successor, Mr. Herr Kirchner, I said, good luck. I left him all my stuff. I sold or gave away a lot of the little mementos like Monica, or I forget what else. My hats. Remember the hats, the Tyrolean hats? I sold those, and because we were having a bazaar and we were raising money for the department. So I felt good about that, somebody still has it, and it's out there somewhere. But I miss all of those students and some of my teachers. We kind of had our own little world. A teacher who teaches at the governor's school has that great advantage of saying, this is what we're going to do this year. And I'm not having somebody telling me, no, you're not doing it. You're doing it my way.
Well, thank you for your time today, Frau Grois. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.
Tschüss.